back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys, so I'm here today to do a review of one of the recent-ish Brandon Sanderson secret projects, which is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I picked this one up a couple months after it was released. I backed the Kickstarter, and so I have gradually been working my way through them, although I'm like 3 months behind or 4 months behind when they actually got released, but still. This book I was quite excited about because I had heard that this was narrated by Hoid, and if you guys know anything about the Cosmere, which you don't have to read this book, it is a standalone, but if you do, then you'll know that Hoid is a fairly major character in the Cosmere, and Hoid seems to kind of have his finger in a lot of pies. He seems to know about a lot of things that are going on in the wider Cosmere, and just generally be involved in lots of the stories that Sanderson has. Hoid generally pops up in a small way in most stories that are set within the Cosmere, and so Hoid is a character that we haven't really seen a lot of viewpoint from, and I was pretty excited to get into it. However, this story is a fairly small story, I would say, in terms of cast of characters and kind of what we're following. That is not to say that the consequences of this story are not planet-wide and possibly Cosmere-wide, but it definitely felt like a smaller pool of characters, and the reason for that is because we have two main characters, Yumi, who is a Yoko Hiju, sorry if I say that wrong, but basically she is kind of a revered person on her planet, and she is really looked up to, really honoured. She has attendants to do everything for her, so she never has to do anything for herself. She is very much worshipped by the people who live in her village and the villages that she travels to, so she is very much, you know, very aloof to everyone else. However, she's also incredibly disconnected from everyone else. She has no real friends, no real connections, and feels quite lonely at times. Her life is incredibly regimented. Every day she must train, and her job essentially is to cool spirits by performing an artistic task, which in her case is the stacking of rocks. Sounds a bit weird, I know, but the way that she does it is pretty cool, and actually the descriptions that Sanderson had of her performing her art I really enjoyed. Now, her life is pretty static in that she basically does the same thing every day, has the same people with her, and doesn't really get to do anything out of the ordinary ever. She's incredibly well kind of brought up and very regimented, and yet there is a part of her soul that longs to have a bit of adventure and be able to do something for herself every now and then. She doesn't really get that opportunity ever, so this is where our other character comes in, Painter. Painter seems to come from an entirely different planet. He is a nightmare painter, and his world, as he knows it, is incredibly wild. It's filled with this dark kind of void that takes over the land, and you can't see anything really through it. The only way that the city that he is from and the other cities that are known about in the world are kind of ongoing is because there are these two electronic kind of magical electricity lines which are used to power everything. No one really knows how they got there or what they are, but these magical lines work to power the cities, and people feed off of them and use them to kind of electronically power things. Now, the void is not just darkness, it actually seems to manifest at times, and these are called nightmares. They try and attack people in their sleep, and they, if they do manage to attack, can become more and more sort of humanoid and formed, and they can eventually take shape, and that's when they become a real threat to humanity. So the story of nightmare painting is that you can again use art to trap the nightmares into a form that they don't want to be and get rid of them. And Painter, our main character, is a nightmare painter. He goes out at night and he traps any kind of rogue nightmares that seem to be coming into the city by using his painting. However, he's pretty lonely as well. He's a pretty jaded character. He's had a fair few things go wrong in his life that have made him fairly upset with society and disappointed in society and disillusioned. And so he's pretty insular. He kind of keeps to himself, and
yeah, he doesn't really have an awful lot going in his world that he wants to do or wants to get to. He's just feeling pretty sorry for himself when we meet him. Now, these two characters end up meeting in a sort of weird, spirity way, and their lives become forever entwined in some very unusual ways, and they end up kind of mostly only being able to really communicate with one another, which is why that I mentioned earlier, this is a fairly small story, because really they are our main two characters. And although we do have, for instance, we have Yumi's assistants and we have Painter's old friends who kind of come into the story, they're really just kind of peripheral characters. And although Hoyd is telling the story, it doesn't feel like he is a character in his own right, because he's trapped in a state of being that's unable to do a lot. So he really is just a narrator. Now, I did like this world. I feel like it is a world that has pretty interesting concepts. As I say, Painter's world is full of this void, this darkness, and then Yumi's world is very different and has these floating plants and floating elements, with the floor being super hot so you can't stand on it without clogs. It's vastly different, the two worlds that they come from, and therefore what they know of the world, what they know of how to exist in the world, is also vastly different. So their conversations that they have and their way of introducing one another into their worlds is pretty exciting, and I really enjoyed kind of seeing them not only get to know one another, but also get to know one another's worlds and also themselves in those worlds, because both of them are kind of lacking something until they meet the other one. It's not necessarily a story that surprised me a huge amount with the ending or kind of the reveals. I definitely saw some of them coming, and I definitely saw the relationships that were forming. But I would say that in terms of the magic and just the writing and the ease of getting into it, it's very classic Brandon Sanderson Cosmere standalone book, which I think if you like the other Cosmere standalones, you're probably going to really like this. I've also heard that this is largely based on some video games and anime and manga that Brandon Sanderson kind of dipped his toe into a little bit, and he was inspired by some of those things. He talks about it a little bit in the author's note. So I've not really read a huge amount of manga. I have read occasional manga, but I am definitely interested in kind of that Asian culture, which definitely feels as though it is pertinent to this story and a big part of this story. And it was really nice to see Sanderson writing that kind of viewpoint, because he doesn't tend to write as many vastly different cultures, and I feel like this culture definitely took heavy influence from some Asian cultures, which I liked seeing. So overall, I gave this a 4 stars, a very solid 4 stars. It's a self-contained story that I liked a lot, but I will say that it could have probably gone on further, and I probably would have carried on reading if it had turned into a series or something like that, because I feel like there is more to come from this world, even if it's not necessarily where I thought we were going to end up. I do think there were some surprise moments. I think for me, the only thing that I found a little bit, not frustrating in any way, but maybe just a little bit over the top, was that the ending felt a little rushed to me, and some of the explanations that were given felt a little bit like they were holding your hand to tell you how it was all going to play out in quite a quick way. And I didn't feel like there was a huge amount of breathing room for like the last section of the book. But I will say the characterization and the world itself and magic, which are all things that Sanderson tends to do really well, I enjoyed all of those elements. So I think if you like other Sandersons, you like his standalone stuff, you're almost definitely going to like this one. And I would love to hear, if you've read it, what did you think of it? Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video very soon. Bye everyone.
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.